Hello ladies, and welcome to week 2 of our Bible study, Children of the Day. I don't know about you, but I have loved getting back into the Word and having something when I wake up, that something's ready for me, that I don't have to think about it, that I don't have to waste time, just thinking that I'm in a rut and I don't know what to do, but that I just have something waiting and that I know that I'm going to really get deep and really search out the Word of God. So, with that being said, this week in your homework, you first of all learned about Thessalonica, the place, and how it is geographically, what's around it, and what it's made up of. You also learned about the writers. There's Paul, there's Silvanus and Timothy, and who they were and how they came together. I thought that was a really cool story. And then also about the Thessalonians themselves, who the letters were written to, and who those people were, and what they became after the gospel was brought to them. In your workbooks, there are what's called principal questions. If you read the intro about the Bible studies in the beginning, you'll know what these are. They're marked by little dots if you don't by now. And I loved in day 4, I wanted to read that question. It was, the Thessalonian believers became what two things? And it was found in 1 Thessalonians 1, 6 through 7. The two things that they became, hopefully, do you know? They became imitators and a model. And I love that because I'm like, we're all leaders. We're part of this TFI team, and that's who we are. We're to be the imitators of Christ. We are to be that model for this younger generation, for those in our church, for those around us that we come into contact with every single day. And so I just thought, we can relate to this so well. We should be the models. We should be the Thessalonians. And I couldn't help but on page 20 of your workbook, there was a quote, I underlined it. It said, "We can have no intimacy with God without our individual pursuit of Him." And I was like, God, how true is that? We can't have intimacy in youth group unless we have done our personal, pursuit of God. We can't have intimacy when we come to church for worship on Sunday morning unless we have already put in the time personally to seek God. We're not ever going to reach that intimacy just in our church setting or just going and doing until we have spent that time alone with Him. You have to know Him on an intimate level, on a personal level, before you can ever really reach it in a group setting. And I hope that makes sense to you. I hope you understand what I mean by that. But it's so true. If we're not seeking Him as a leadership team, we're never going to get to that level in youth group with those teenagers. And we should be the ones leading them there. You can't lead anybody anywhere that you haven't been yourself because you don't know where you're going. So anyways, going back to what they were talking about, I said that I loved how she told the story of the 3 writers, because Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy are all different ages. They all have very different personalities, and they have a completely different story. And yet God just brings these 3 random people together at this random time and just mesh them together so well that they wrote, 2 amazing books of the Bible for us that we still turn to and learn from today. And I feel like, that's us again. We're this leadership team. We are very different personalities. We come from so many different places. We all have a completely different story, but God can mesh us together so well that we can minister the gospel seamlessly, that we can make it seem like we're a family that's always been together. And that's what I love about this church and about our team, is that we are a family, and we are a sisterhood that stands up for each other. And I go back to, in the first video, I said that's my prayer for us, is that we see that we open our eyes to see that we really are this family that stays together and that ministers because of God's grace and because God can do such amazing things with such random things. Page 18, again, I underlined my book like crazy this week. It said, and I love this is to you individually, said, "Don't let pride or timidity come between you and the presence of God." You have a place here. You have a place here. The purpose, unique and substantial, not merely some spiritual reality floating like a fleck in the air. I just love that. You specifically have a place here. You have a place in TFI. You have a place in DCC. You have a place in your family. You have a place in Liberty County. You have a place, and God put you here for a very specific reason, and I love that. Now, saying that, here's my challenge. I want you right now to find a piece of paper and a marker or pen or anything that you want. I want you to, in the next few minutes, if you have to pause me, which you probably will because you can't do this in 5 seconds, pause me, and I want you to map your sphere of influence. I'll show you what that looks like. No, it's not mine, I'm sorry. It's her beautiful handwriting. But this is what it's going to look like. You're going to map this, and I want you to tell, what is your sphere of influence? Where do you go on a daily basis? What do you see? Who do you come in contact with that you could influence and make a difference with? And think outside the box. You know, we come to church, yes, and we know those people. We know that they're in our sphere of influence. But where else do you go? Who else do you come in contact with and see that maybe you haven't really opened your eyes to? That's what I want you to think about going into this video, and I think you'll see why very soon. So at this time, pause, do the activity, and then go ahead and watch Beth Moore's session 2. And then come back and I'll show you one more thing. Okay, now that you've seen the video, I want you to think back to where Beth Moore had the 3 women on stage, and she did the visual example with them of the group and how we can turn inward and that we need to be looking outward. Just think back on that whole thing, and I want to share just a little bit of a personal testimony with you guys, because I know we're not meeting face to face, but I want this to be personal. So you guys know that when Nick and I came to DCC, you know, we had been in ministry for quite a few years, and we'd experienced, you know, some hurt. There was a couple of them that, you know, were just little things we had to learn about, just typical ministry and working with people, but there were a few that really impacted us, and not in a good way. There was one particular one where there was a volunteer that was in our youth group that I had become really close to, and we didn't agree with some of the ministry stuff, and so we parted ways, and not in a good way. It was the ugly kind of way that just got worse and worse and worse the more that we tried to mend it. And we finally decided this will just never be again. Well, coming out of that, it was a really deep wound for me. And I honestly, I don't know if it was consciously or subconsciously, but I told myself I would never become close friends with anybody that volunteered or was a leader in our youth group again. I know that's shocking to you, but it really was how I felt at the time, and I stayed that way for many years. I kept it almost like as though I went to you know, my work, and this was a business relationship, and there was a boundary that you couldn't cross. That I'll be a good friend with you, that I'll be there for you, but this is a business relationship, and you can't step into my personal space. And I know that sounds so wrong, even coming out of my own mouth, but that's really how I operated for a few years. When I came to DCC, you know, it was Nick, me, and Taylor. And I think back again to week 1 of how, you know, God set up Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy so perfectly, because God knew that Paul was hurt and that he needed somebody to heal that hurt. And God did that perfectly with Taylor, with me. He knew that I needed a friend, someone that could honestly step over to that other side and understand me so personally that I couldn't fight, you know, this is a business relationship, you can't come any further, because she got me. And you guys know that, you know, you guys have that best friend, you know, that person that you're like, you just get me, I don't have to explain it. And that's what Taylor was for me when we very first came. And it was almost like God made me break that boundary so that the floodgates could open up and I would, you know, not harbor that any longer. It wouldn't be a wall or a boundary for me any longer. And it was shortly after that that we started bringing in all these other people and these leaders that are you guys right now. And I just absolutely love that. I want you to know, though, when she brought up those women and she faced them inward, shoulder to shoulder, I was like looking at a mirror for the first time, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. But it was like God finally showed me. It was, you know, I wrapped my arms around you guys and I clung to you so tightly because you were the ones that broke that hurt. And I thought, oh my gosh, but in doing that, because I was so happy and I just clung to that so tightly, I didn't realize how inward looking I had become. And that, you know, God just used that as such a reminder, just slap in my face of, you've got to turn outward, Ivy. You've got to look outward. This is, you know, you were put here to heal and to do a job, and that's great, but now you need to do your job. So anyways, I challenge you guys this week, you know, to look outward, to be that person that turns around and looks out to that map of, you know, that map that you made, that sphere of influence that you made earlier before this session, of where can you be an influence that you didn't think about before. So let me read this from Beth. She said, whether you see yourself as a we, a you, or a they, you are part of the church, Christ's bride, and sister loved by God, I know He has chosen you. Together, let's look outward this week. Before our next session, take the time to come alongside someone new to your church family or community. Though we stand shoulder to shoulder here, there are many ladies and teenagers outside this group, many of them believers and seekers who feel lonely and cut off from hope. Make it your goal to be the active love of Jesus at work in someone's life over the course of these next few days. You just might gain a new friend or a new team to TFI. So anyways, I love you guys, and I will see you next week.